Parsha Korach, Likkutei Sichos, by the Lubavitcher Rebbe, page 265 in the Blue Book. Today's shiur is in blessed memory of R Meir ben Mordechai. May his neshama have an aliyah. Okay, when divisions lead to peace and harmony, just rewards. Two different punishments were visited upon Korach and his company for fermenting a rebellion against Moshe and Aaron. The households of Korach, Dasan, and Aviram were swallowed by the earth, as it is written. They and all they possessed descended alive into the grave. The 250 men who brought the incense offering were consumed by fire. As well-known punishments visited upon a person from above are representative of the transgression that he committed, as our sages commented, with the measure that a person measures, he is himself measured. All Torah authorities agree concerning this, even those who follow the opinion that reward and punishment are not a direct result of a person's mitzvahs and transgressions, but rather something arbitrarily determined by divine choice. However, more so does the apply according to the view that reward and punishment are a natural consequence of the person's actions. Clarification is necessary. What connection do two punishments of being consumed by fire and being swallowed by earth have to do with the sin and spiritual blemish caused by Korach and his company fermenting a rebellion against Moshe and Aaron? The connection between Korach's action and the punishment of being swallowed by the earth, they descended alive into the grave, can be explained simply. This is a cause and effect relationship. Korach and his company disputed the appointments made by Moshe, claiming that he acted on his own initiative. Through this dispute, they displayed a desire to raise themselves above all others and be elevated to priesthood. Accordingly, they were punished measure for measure, and were compelled to make the ultimate descent, descending alive into the grave. Similar concepts apply regarding the punishment of those consumed by fire. From a straightforward reading of the narrative, it appears that they were punished in this manner for bringing the incense offer, because it is connected with fire, since they brought a foreign fire, for they were not Kohanim, those charged with bringing the incense offer. A fire emerged from Hashem and consumed them. Nevertheless, further clarification is required. After all, Moshe instructed these people to bring the incense offer. Now, it's true that it's necessary to arrange a trial to clarify that the man whom God will choose is the Holy One and the others will perish. However, the connection between the punishment and the fundamental dimension of the sin, the rebellion they fermented, is not apparent. This is emphasized by the Torah itself, which describes them after they were consumed by fire as those who transgressed against their souls, which Rashi interprets as meaning that they became transgressors against their souls by fomenting a rebellion against the Holy One, blessed be He. Furthermore, God commanded that the fire pans be made into plates hammered out and an overlay by the altar to serve as a sign to remembrance, so that all others will say, these came from the people who disputed the priesthood. If one were to posit it that were punished for overstepping their boundaries and bringing the fire of incense offering, the fundamental dimension of their sin would not be emphasized by that sign. Seemingly, it would not be underscored that the punishment became because of the rebellion. Thus, we are compelled to say that the punishment of being consumed by fire itself relates to the remembrance, so that all others will say they came from the people who disputed the priesthood. Thus, it's necessary to clarify the nature of that connection. Clarification is also necessary regarding the punishment of being swallowed by earth. According to the explanation given above, the fundamental emphasis is found in the statement, they and all they possess descended alive into the grave. That is, they were compelled to descend as punishment for their sin of raising themselves above others. However, from the continuation of the narrative in the Torah and the interpretation of our sages, the emphasis is not on their descent, but rather on their being swallowed up. Indeed, the rabbis referred to them as those who were swallowed, signaling out the twofold punishment. There is another point that requires clarification in the Midrash. There is another point that requires clarification. The Midrash states that Korach was punished more than all the others. He was both consumed by fire and swallowed by earth. Why was Korach condemned to both forms of death? Were he to have been consumed by fire or not swallowed by earth, those who were swallowed could have been complained. Who brought this retribution upon us? Korach. Yet we are being swallowed while Korach is saved. Were he to have been swallowed by the earth and not consumed by fire, those who were consumed could have complained. Who brought his retribution upon us? Korach. Yet we are being consumed while he is saved. Therefore Korach was condemned to both forms of death at the hands of heaven. On the surface, even if he were condemned to only one form of death, and thus those condemned to the other form of death could have complained, since they felt that their punishment Korach received was not sufficient because the punishment they received was more severe. Nonetheless, there would be no grounds for the claim that Korach was saved. After all, he was punished for another form of death. He was punished with another form of death. Unintended consequences. All the above questions can be clarified, first explaining the fundamental point motivating Korach's rebellion. Korach's claim was that the entire congregation is holy and God is among them. Why do you set yourselves up as supreme over God's congregation, is what Korach asked. Korach desired that there be no distinction among the Jewish people, and more definitely that one Jew should not hold himself as supreme over others. According to his understanding, such an approach would lead to unity among the Jewish people. The Torah, however, demonstrates that such a claim, that conduct to which leads, brings about a very opposite of unity. It produces divisions and dispute, as reflective of the Targum, which interprets the phrase Korach took as Korach divided. Indeed, he and his approach are identified with the concept dispute as a whole, as our sages commented. In the Sanhedrin, similar statements are found in the Midrash Tahumah, Parsha Korach, and Bamidbar Rabbah, where he comments, because of the dispute. Come now, see how severe a quarrel is. Note Midrash Tahumah, Parsha Korach. Although the verses were written in part of a dialogue between Hashem and Moshe, our sages interpret it as a prohibition. Indeed, there are those who maintain that the verse is not merely asamachasa, a verse cited by sages to support a concept they developed by considering it as one of the Torah's 365 negative commandments. The question arises, how can Korach demand of unity among the Jewish people lead to a dispute, and indeed so severe a dispute that our sages connect any controversy that could possibly exist among the Jewish people with Korach's rebellion? To be who you are. The explanation of the above is alluded to Moshe's reply to Korach. In the morning, God will make known. As the Midrash explains, and is cited by Rashi in his commentary on the verse, Moshe told them, the Holy One, blessed be He, established boundaries in this world. Can you join together day and night? At the very onset, the Torah says there was evening and there was morning, and God made a distinction between light and darkness. Similarly, He made a distinction between Israel and the nations. In the same manner, He set Aaron apart, as it is written. He set apart Aaron to be sanctified as the Holy of Holies. Are you capable of holding back the distinction the Holy One, blessed be He, made between the light and the darkness? It is only in such a manner that you will be able to annul the distinction conveyed upon Aaron. To explain, Hashem created the world with the 10 utterances, not with one utterance. Therefore, by distinction, leading to diverse levels among the created beings, every created being has its own definition and limitations which distinguish it and set it apart from other beings. As the Midrash mentions, there is distinction within time. Evening is not morning. Each time period is distinct with its specific feature and purpose. It is specific with the day and night. Each carries out its individual purpose according to its definition and the characteristic appropriate for its time period, and the two are joined to become one day. Similar concepts apply regarding the design, service, mission of every created being. The purpose and the perfect state of creation is achieved when every created being carries out the mission for which it was created in its specific definitions and characteristics. The reason for such a multitude of distinctions is Hashem's intent for the dwelling in the lowest realms. The lower and further removed a realm is from its source of godly light, the greater and more pronounced are the distinctions associated with it. However, Counterintuitively, as it may seem, it is specifically through the multiplicity that exists within the creation that God's simple oneness is revealed. When created being does not carry out its mission according to its definition and characteristic, but instead seeks to perform the divine service that is designated for another being, this disrupts the structure of creation and brings about confusion and chaos. So in other words, what the Eibishter is teaching us through Moshe is that just as day and night make up, or light and night, day and night make up a day, that you can't combine the night and the darkness. You either have light or you have dark. But together, part of the day is light and part of the day is night, or part of the day is light and part of the day is dark, and together they make a full day. So Hashem chose that there should be Kohanim and Levim, and there should be Yisrael, and together they should make Am Yisrael, they should make the whole of the Jewish people. So just as we have to have light and we have to have dark, we have to have Kohanim and we have to have Yisrael, doesn't mean that one is better than another. It's that there's a place and a time for each and every creation. And when each creation fulfills its duty, then there's structure and peace. And when a creation acts out of its own natural, or out of God's will, when it acts out of Hashem's will, then this creates confusion, not just for itself, but for all the worlds and all of the creatures around it. Okay, the three building blocks of existence, just as there were distinctions and differences among the created beings themselves, there are also differences in the holy light within creation. For example, the aspect of godliness that transcends creation, that is invested in creation, more specifically, that holy light is characterized by distinctive levels manifest each day of the three facets of the Maimonic Ashan, Olam, Shana, and Nefesh, space, time, and soul. The Sefer Yetzirah defines as the three parameters of existence. There are the distinctions of Olam, space. For example, the Mishnah lists 10's level of holiness in Eretz Yisrael, each that are loftier than the next. Similarly, regarding Shana, time, there are weekday festivals, Shabbos, and then there is Yom Kippur, referred to as the Shabbos, Shabbosan. In a similar way, there are also distinctions in the Nefesh, different levels among Jewish souls. For example, there are general distinctions within the Jewish people that define them in a threefold nation, making up of Kohanim, Levim, and Yisrael. Within the Kohanim, there are also distinct levels, ranging from an ordinary Kohen to the highest level of the Kohen Gadol. More particularly, as Torah later mentions, there are 10 categories among the Jewish people, ranging to the head of your tribes to your wood choppers and water drawers. Ultimately, there are 600,000 root souls. The 600,000 souls serve as the roots for the souls of the entire Jewish people, each root itself into 600,000 sub-roots. Among the created beings in the world at large, the desirable mode of conduct is that no created being deviate from its mission. But rather, every specific created being should carry out its particular mission. Since each Jewish soul is interrelated with all other Jewish souls, each individual's particular mission also contains aspects that are representative of the mission of all other Jews. This brings about a state of peace in creation as a whole. The reflection of this concept is manifest in the functioning of the stability of society. Simply put, when there is peace and unity, when a person recognizes the boundaries between himself and another, and thus does not try to take another person's property or fight with him to take what rightfully belongs to another. Similar concept applies to the realm of holiness. Similar concept applies to the realm of holiness. Peace comes about when there is no overstepping of boundaries and no opposition between one level of space, time, and soul and another. Instead, each entity fills its own space and carries out its own function. Insight can be gained from the spiritual import of the prohibition against going beyond the Shabbos limits. In a spiritual sense, it is a negative factor because it involves overstepping the boundaries of holiness and conveying the energy of Shabbos to the place of the klipos, the unholy dimensions of the spiritual cosmos. By contrast, by performing one of the forbidden labors on Shabbos, desecrates the Shabbos. He creates an empty space within the prevailing Shabbos atmosphere, enabling the forces of Klippa, Hasher Shalom, to enter. Understanding the above does not represent a contradiction to the fact that a person has the ability to add from the mundane to the holy in all three dimensions of space, time, and soul. In the realm of space, one can separate the tithes, truma, and sacrifices, thereby adding these objects of the realm of holiness. Similarly, it is possible to expand the limits of the city of Jerusalem and the courtyard, thus adding sanctity to a given space. In the realm of time, the observance of the festival, which is determined by the sanctification of the Jewish court, is dependent on the Jewish people. As our sages say, Yisrael sanctifies the times. Moreover, there is a mitzvah to add to Shabbos and to the festivals, extending their sanctity and observance both before and after the minimal required times. In the realm of soul, one may purchase a non-Jewish servant or enable a non-Jew to convert to Judaism. Note that regarding distinctions among the Jewish people themselves is possible for an increase in holiness in spiritual sense. Each person, according to the Rambam, whose spirit generously motivates him to set himself aside and stand before Hashem to serve him as a sanctified, as holy of holies, Hashem will provide what is sufficient for him in this world, like he provides for the Kohanim and the Levites. When making such additions, a Jew is acting with the power of the Torah and according to its commandments. The distinctions were established by Hashem, and he commands and empowers man in specific ways and times to extend the boundaries of holiness. Indeed, it is possible and even a mitzvah for him to do so. By doing so, he acts as an agent of Hashem. Honor the mitzvahs because they are my agent. Since the potential for adding to the realm of holiness is possible only when acting as an agent of Hashem, when one deviates from that agent, seeks to make an addition that is not in accordance with his will, that agency is nullified and the sphere of holiness is not expanded. Another example of extending the realm of holiness is performing a mitzvah behider in a mysterious and beautiful manner, or adding homeras, extra stringencies to one's observance. These additions are also part of Torah's commandments, and one taking them on as an act of God's agent. Distinction and interrelation. Although respecting the boundaries of God creates a backdrop for stability and harmony, it does not represent the true and ultimate definition of peace. Since every entity is set aside by itself in its own world, as it were, and does not share a connection with another entity, it is separate from every other entity. Such a situation can only be considered peace in a qualified sense. For example, only that there is no conflict. Nonetheless, it is not peace in a broader sense. It does not represent a state of perfect unity or perfect accord and unity. The true concept of peace is realized when the entities interrelate, each one influence and complementing the other. Each one influencing and complementing the other. Together with the fact that that each entity carries out its own specific purpose, they are influencing each other in a manner similar to the two angels who call to one another, which the Targum renders as receiving from the other. Alternatively, one on the loftier level generates benefit from one on the lower level, and thus our sages state that from the Beis Hamikdash light would shine forth to the entire world is like a manner Shabbos affects the 6 days of the week. As the Zohar states, all the days of the week are blessed from Shabbos. and the Kohen Gadol draws down benefit for the Jewish people. As a whole, by reciting the priestly blessings and carrying out the other priestly functions. Similarly, Jewish people have the potential to contribute to and enhance each of these realms. Thus, in the realm of space, the sanctuary and the Beis Hamikdash were initially built through donations of every one of the Jewish people. Similarly, after the construction of these structures, they were maintained and the sacrifices were offered through the sheklim donations by the entire people. These were offerings brought as desserts of the altar, in other words, and they were offered for the sake of the altar itself. Moreover, there are certain elements of the sanctuary of the Beis Hamikdash that were dedicated through the performance of sanctifying service upon them. Similar concepts apply regarding the realm of time. Not only does the holiness of the festival connect with and correspond to the divine service of the Jewish people, as reflected by the statement, Israel sanctifies the seasons. The intent is that the Jewish court sanctifies the new month, and by doing so sanctifies the festival whose observance is dependent on a specific day of the month. By contrast, the sanctity of Shabbos is not dependent on the court at all, but rather is dependent on the weekly cycle. Whoever labors on the days preceding Shabbos will eat on Shabbos. The inner meaning of the teaching is that if the Jew labors in his divine service, investing greater energies into the 6 weekdays in preparation for Shabbos, he will feel the holiness of Shabbos to a greater degree. Similarly, in the realm of soul, the Talmud interprets the command leaving regarding a Kohen. Interprets the command given regarding a Kohen. You shall sanctify him, as indicated that a Kohen should be given priority in all matters of holiness, to give him precedence in every matter involving honor, to have him recite the blessing first for a meal, and to have him take a generous portion first. Based on the straightforward meaning of the term, you shall sanctify him, it can be said that the Jewish people augment the holiness of the Kohanim. Similar concepts can apply regarding the opinion of Rav Ashi. He set apart Aaron to be sanctified as the Holy of Holies, for this is apparent that the difference between the opinions of Rabbi Yishmael, who derives this law from the verse, you shall sanctify him, and similarly the opinion of Rav Ashi, who derives it from he sets apart Aaron, and the previous explanation given in Gittin, which derives that the law from another verse extends beyond the mere interpretation of the verses. Rabbi Yishmael and Rabbi Ashi implied that the additional holiness is conveyed in the Holanim by the Jewish people. Their holiness is not merely an inherent attribute. Based on the straightforwardness of the meaning of the term, you shall sanctify him, it can only be said that the Jewish people augment the holiness of the Kohanim. The manner in which the Jews relate to the Kohanim is merely an expression of honor or an act inspired by the ways of peace. Instead, by conducting themselves in this manner, the Jews increase the holiness of the Kohanim, as indicated by the straightforward meaning of the commandment, you shall sanctify him. The harmonious interrelation between these different levels is possible only when there is a distinct division and separation between them, yet one that allows for each one to be influenced, one that allows for each one to influence the other. Unity resulting from diversity. This interrelation leads to the highest level of peace, to the simultaneous relation of the ultimate completion. The term Hashalama, translated as completion, connotes the unity achieved when the different parts of a whole complement each other and function in synergy. And the perfection of all these levels. To refer to a related concept, the Alter Rebbe in the Likkutei Torah Devarim explains that the Jewish people are bound in unity. On an individual level, everyone needs each other, and as a collective, the Jewish nation is one organic whole. To use the human body as an analogy, the limbs and organs of the body share a symbiotic relation, each one possessing a unique tendency and endowment that is needed by the benefits of all the others. In order to clarify the analogy of the unity of the Jewish people, the Alter Rebbe elaborates, stating, for example, a person's body comprises both of head and feet, although the feet are the lowest level below the other organs, while the head is the upmost and far loftier than they. Nevertheless, from one standpoint, the feet possess an advantage and are superior, for they are necessary to walk and they support the body and the head. Also, when the head feels heavy, blood can be let from the feet and the head will be healed, receiving its vitality from the feet. Thus, the head cannot reach its perfection without the feet. Similarly, the entire Jewish people are likened to one complete body. Similar concepts apply regarding space. The perfection of the loftiest of the 10 levels of the holiest is manifest only when there are 10 levels of holiness, when all 10 levels are present. Likewise, with regarding to time, Shahana, which we have translated as time, literally means year. In the context of our observance, the fulfillment and perfection of the year comes about when it contains all it manifested elements. Weekdays, Shabbos, and festivals. Thus, in the simple sense, when speaking about a year, there is also a concept of a whole made up of different elements. This is reflected in the fact that the Hebrew word shana, year, relates to two other words that share the same root, shenui, change, and sheni, the second, a repetition of the entire cycle. Thus, a year is comprised of a cycle, including all 4 seasons, together with all the different changes that take place within them and during them. For that above, it's understood that with this concept of peace and unity, when all the different elements are integrated into a single complete entity, their individual boundaries, distinctions, and decisions and definitions are relevant. In all the realms of space and time and soul, the integration of different elements into a single perfect whole is achieved specifically because of their distinction as unique elements and not because of the common denomination that they share. We see an example of this in the human body, where it is possible to say that there is a complete and when is it possible to say that there is a complete and perfect body? When it comprises of all the distinct entities, the head, the trunk, the legs, and more particularly the 248 limbs and 365 idiom or sutras, veins. An inclusive term for referring to the blood vessels, suins, and nerves. The manifestation of the quintessential oneness. Going back to that, discussing when is the body perfect, is for one, when the body can't feel itself. When a person doesn't feel his body, then we know it's a healthy body. When Hashem Shalom, a person has a pain or an ache or a discomfort, a dis-ease, lack of ease, they feel uncomfortable, so then it's not a healthy body. It means that one of the organs isn't functioning properly, or it's not getting blood properly from one of the blood vessels. So in order for a Yid to utilize his 248 limbs and his 365 sutras or blood vessels, suins or blood vessels, he must equate the 248 limbs to the 248 positive mitzvahs and the 365 veins to 365 negative transgressions, realizing that the life course to operate the body comes from the evil inclination, which is operated within the blood. But at the same time, in order to elevate the body, the 248 limbs, he must perform the positive mitzvahs necessary to do so. Moving on, the manifestation of the quintessential oneness. The above conception of peace and unity in the 3 realms of space, time, and the soul applies only with regard to creation, although including in that term are also higher spiritual realms. Since the world was created through 10 utterances, therefore creation as a whole is comprised of a multiplicity of diverse elements. As mentioned above, moreover, even in the light of holiness, invest in these 3 realms. For example, God's light that is drawn down in the time and space, which are defined by distinctions and changes, is comprised of 10 distinct levels of holiness, 10 different rungs. Together they comprise one perfect whole, the holiness of Hashem in the world. Nevertheless, the light of the holiness exists for itself, and on an even loftier level, it exists in source, and how much more so in its ultimate source, Hashem's essence, which transcends all limits and descriptions. The entire concept of peace and unity is not relevant because Hashem represents singular and undefined oneness. where the Alter Rebbe explains that just as a person's soul endows all the organs and limbs of the body with vitality, but in and in itself a single and simple spiritual entity is too, God's light endows all existence with vitality, but the light itself is simple and transcends without definition. The term peace implies that the establishment of unity and oneness among different entities when speaking of Hashem's essence, that the concept is not relevant for on that level, there is nothing but Him. The singular and undefined oneness also has an effect, and it's evident in the ultimate manifestation of holiness mentioned above in the three realms of space, time, and soul. The oneness within creation describes how now is the oneness involving different entities as they exist within their own identities. Because of Hashem's holiness, not only do these entities not conflict, but they function in harmonious unity. Nevertheless, their own individual identity is still felt. God's essence, by contrast, represents absolute and singular oneness. Aside from Him, there is nothing else. The absolute and singular oneness is also reflected within creation. In the realm of space, in the Holy of Holies, the Ark of the Covenant did not take up space. It was evident that the space itself transcended space, as well as is known that the phenomenon is possible only because of God's existence. As explained in their sources, the entire span of the Holy of Holies was 20 cubits. There were 10 cubits from each side of the ark, and the ark itself was 2.5 cubits long. The space occupied by the ark was miraculously not included in the measure. In the realm of time, Yom Kippur is described as Achas Bashana, once a year, a term identified with the level of Yehida, a quintessential oneness that reflects the oneness of Hashem's essence. And similarly, in the realm of soul, there is only one Kohen Gadol, who is also identified with the level of Yehida. When the Kohen Gadol enters the Holy of Holies on the Yom Kippur, he drew down the potential for peace and perfection, and even loftier levels, including God's singular oneness with all the levels of Jewish people as they exist within their individual levels of holiness. A question of timing. Based on the above, it is possible to understand our sage's question. Korach was intelligent, so what did he see that led him to his folly? Since the sages describe him as intelligent, although no mention has been made of his beforehand, it appears that one can derive this conclusion from his very narrative. His actions reflect a degree of intelligence. Even so, the sages act, what did he see that led him to his folly? Implying that while the conclusion he reached showed his intelligence, it also indicated a certain element of folly, or misstep due to craziness. An example, or the evil inclination clouding his judgment, rather. To explain his point, the definition of intelligence and wisdom is reflected in our sage's words, who is wise, one who knows what will be. He does not only see what is obvious and apparent, but an entity or situation, but is able to also appreciate its inner and hidden meaning and the consequence that will only be revealed afterwards. To relate this point to the concept at hand with his calm, the entire congregation is holy. With his claim, rather, the entire congregation is holy and God is among them. Why do you set yourselves above as the supreme over God's congregation? Korach was saying that there is no basis for division among the Jewish people because of his wisdom and intelligence. He saw the concept of peace and unity as exist in its source, where there is no distinctions whatsoever, but only God's simple and singular oneness. A oneness that will be revealed in the ultimate future and will be manifested in the peace and unity that will permeate this world in the future time, as it is written. No longer will one man teach his fellow, because they will know me. Despite all that is all the above, for Korach to make the claim was an act of folly. Because this true and singular oneness can exist only in its source in the ultimate future. The present era in the material world represents an intermediate phase when our sages comment on the phrase today to fulfill them. Today to fulfill them. On the phrase today to fulfill them, action is necessary to bring the world to the actualization of its perfect state, and in the present era, the mode of conduct that erases differences will not only lead to unity and peace, but on the contrary will bring the very opposite of peace, conflict, as indeed resulted from Korach's claim. For example, the mitzvah can only be fulfilled in the material world, not in the afterlife. Our sages continue, today, in the present era, is the time to do them, but tomorrow, in the ultimate future, is the time to receive reward for doing them. To create a parallel, there is a prohibition against intimate, incestuous relationships. Explains that in the upper realms, the spiritual counterpart of such relationships are wondrous and lofty divine expressions of oneness. In those realms where the spiritual counterpart of those relationships come together, a perfect oneness is established in an ultimate state of unity. However, in the lower realms, in the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the realms of separation, it's impossible to receive such lofty states of oneness. On the contrary, such relationships are forbidden, even considered utterly evil. Moving forward. Why leadership is necessary. To explain the above by saying the entire congregation is holy, Korach implied that all Jews share the same degree of holiness. Accordingly, he maintained that it is possible for an Israelite, a non-Kohen, to enter the Beis Hamikdash and bring sacrifices and an incense offering. However, Korach erred, since this is not the level and type of divine service designated for a non-Kohen. Such an attempt results in division and inner friction, both within the person himself and within the people as a whole. The inner core of every Jew is his yehida. Generally, the yehida is described as the loftiest level of the soul that transcends all divisions. However, at a more abstract level, it is explained that beyond the level of yehida, there is a spark of the Creator, which is actually godliness. It encloses itself in the spark of the created being that is called Yehidah. Through the spark of the Creator within his soul, a Jew is able to receive influence that the holiness of the Kohen Gadol elicits through his priestly service, which then radiates in proper proportion with the lower levels of the person's soul. So in other words, the Kohen Gadol is able to receive this amount of holiness. He was the vessel that was chosen and dictated by the Eibishter, and then he distributes this power, this essence of godliness to the rest of Israel, similar to how we connect with the Rebbe or how Israel was to connect with Moshe Rabbeinu. However, when a Jew follows the approach of Korach and seeks to overstep his boundaries and attain a higher level than those for which he is fit, the sparks of the Creator withdraws and rises upward, because the individual levels of that Jew cannot contain such lofty holiness. As a result, it does not influence the lower levels of his soul. Instead, that Jew's individual spark, the sparks of created being within which his personal spark of godliness is enclosed, descends and is swallowed up below, becoming overwhelmed by material concerns. So it's like when a person becomes so concerned with where his statue is instead of his actual service, then he's missing the point of his avoda. Similar concept apply regarding Jewish people as a whole. When there is not a leader like Moshe who is set as a supreme over God's congregation, the distinction separate Kohanim, Levite, and Israel, and those separating the Kohen Gadol from the remainder of the people will be lacking. That will inevitably lead to strife and discord among the Jewish people. So that by having a Moshe Rabbeinu, by having a Rebbe, by having a Nasi of the generation, it creates order for everybody to understand exactly, specifically what they're supposed to be doing. It is specifically such distinctions that separate and bring about that in the present era makes it possible to perfect sense of peace and unity in which one level can interact and influence another. Through such synergistic relationships, people on different levels complete and make up the entire Jewish people, enabling them to form one organic whole like the human body. Ideally, there should be a synergistic and harmonious relationship in which Jews of loftier level guide and teach those of a lower spiritual level, thus enabling our people to function as a single, unified entity. However, when the distinctions mentioned above are lacking, division and separation arise among Jews. Those who are on lofty level ascend and withdraw and do not share their influence with those on a lower level. And as a result, those who are on a lower level, instead of being inspired and direct to reach higher, descend and become more materially oriented. This parallels the motif that they characterized the shattering of the vessels in the realm of Tohu, which is the extreme high lights. The realm of Tohu was characterized by manifold and intense powerful lights, oros, and diminutive vessels, kalims that weren't capable of holding the light. As a result, the lights withdrew and ascended upward, while the vessels were shadowed and fell downward, descending into the realm of Klippa. This above also clarifies the meaning of the Mishnah. A dispute that is for the sake of heaven will ultimately endure. A dispute that is not for the sake of heaven will ultimately not endure. What is an example of a dispute that is not for the sake of heaven? This is the dispute of Korach and his entire company. A straightforward reading of the Mishnah implies that when a dispute is for the sake of heaven, the dispute itself will ultimately endure. Why should a dispute endure? Because when it's a dispute for the sake of heaven, both sides of the dispute are genuine and express our perspective that is true, and therefore will endure, since the dispute arises because of heaven dictates, as it were, that both approaches are necessary, they will both be sustained. By contrast, when the dispute is not for the sake of heaven, separation and even strife will arise and both approaches will be nullified. Fitting punishment. The above explanation enable us to understand how the punishment of being consumed by fire and being swallowed by earth suffered by Korach and his company are measure for measure in retribution for the sin of rebellion. As they were manifest concurrently, these punishments accentuated the consequences of the sin of division and separation, in a manner of measure for measure. The punishment of withdraw and ascend on one hand and the descent on the other. When something is consumed in fire, the loftier and more refined elements of the entire being are consumed, rise up, and are withdrawn. Conversely, by being swallowed up, the lower elements are not fit to ascend and be absorbed in the lofty levels, to be consumed by fire, descend alive into the grave. This explanation also fits with the straightforward understanding of the literal distinctions between the punishment and those whom they were visited. In the narrative concerning Korach and his company, 250 men who brought an incense offering were punished by the consuming of fire, whose nature is to always rise upward. They were of the elite, the Nasim of the congregation, those called to the assembly, men of repute, the heads of the court. It says that regarding the distinction between the 250 men consumed by fire, Dasan and Aviram, who were swallowed by the earth. It states that the sin of the 250 men who brought the incense offering resembled that of Nadav and Avihu. Accordingly, they also suffered death via the incense offering like Nadav and Avihu did. The sin of Nadav and Avihu was that they died because they drew too close to Hashem and were motivated by the spiritual motif of Razal, in intense yearning for Hashem, without the balancing influence of the motif of Shav, which emphasizes the importance of carrying out Hashem's desire for dwelling in the lowest realms. This resembled the characteristics of the vessel of Tohu, as explained at length in the Maimar entitled Acharei Mos. The punishment of being swallowed by earth, descending into earthliness, was visited upon Dasan and Aviram and all the people of Korach's household. Even before the rebellion, they were base people, in indicating by the Torah's description in their previous sins, indicating they had already been referred to as wicked. For this reason, when speaking of the punishment of descending alive into the grave, the Midrash emphasizes that they were swallowed up. The implication is that when the boundaries between the different levels of holiness are nullified, the spark of holiness that is found within the lower levels is swallowed up by the grave, by the three impure klipos, as it is well known regarding the sparks of holiness that are found within klipa. The forces of these impure klipos are then received their vitality from the sparks that are swallowed up within them. As stated in another source regarding The ash that remained after the fire, after all the elements of good that were in it were consumed by the fire and refined, it remained dry and empty of good. These are the three impure klipos. Nevertheless, there is a minimal amount of good in them. This refers to the godly spark that is in exile with them, which is the source of the existence and vitality. The analogy of God's spark being swallowed up implies that, like food, it is swallowed up and no longer exists as an independent entity, but becomes the flesh and blood of the person who eats it. The food also generates energy for that person. How Korach himself was punished. On the basis, we can also understand the statement of the Midrash that Korach was punished in both ways. He was consumed by fire and swallowed by the earth. Since he was the source of the root of the rebellion, he was the one who enticed everyone. The punishment he received included both the element and the extremes involved in the separation and division. Based on the above, it is understood why Korach is not explicitly mentioned initially, neither among those who were consumed by fire, nor among those consumed by earth, because each of those groups was responsible for only one of the dimensions of the dispute, in contrast to Korach, who was guilty of both. Were he to have been punished by only one manner, being consumed by fire or being swallowed by earth, there would have been grounds for complaint. Why was he either a loftier portion of his personality or a basier portion saved? That is, there would have been an aspect that his being the punished and separation did not affect. Therefore, Korach suffered both punishment. His soul was consumed by fire, a punishment that affected lower dimension. However, his body, his lower dimension, remained intact, and it was ruled to the place where the ones who were swallowed descend, and he was swallowed together with them. The above finding contemporary relevance. The above provides a lesson for us in all times, particularly in our present stage. There are those who claim, for the sake of peace and developing and maintaining harmonious relationships with others, that it is not necessary to focus on the boundaries and distinctions that Hashem created within the world. They begin to remove the boundaries and distinctions between men and women. In the realm of halakha, for example, to accept women as a witness for a bill of divorce or a marriage ceremony, to include them in a minyan, and the like. Similarly, they seek to create an intermingling in religion and faith between Jews and non-Jews, creating voids in the barrier separating Israel and the other nations by allowing non-halachic conversions and the like. The narrative of Korach serves as a clear message regarding the above. When one seeks to nullify the boundaries that the Holy One, blessed be He, defined as His world, aside from the fundamental point that this approach is opposite to the Torah of Moshe, which is Hashem's Torah, and thus by doing so, one creates a rebellion against Hashem, it does not bring about peace. On the contrary, this leads to strife and separation. Entities that are fundamentally separate, form of, or opposite of each other cannot be joined together. That is possible only when there is a division separating one from another. For example, there cannot be a useful connection between water and fire unless there is an entity, a pot or the like, that contains the water and intervenes between them. Otherwise, there will not be any benefit from joining them. On the contrary, joining them will cause one of them to utterly nullify the existence of the other, specifically by holding firm and reinforcing the boundaries and distinction that Hashem established in this world, in His world, enabling each entity to carry out the purpose for which Hashem created. Peace will be established between different types of entities. In such an instance, the peace is established on the foundation of the Torah, which is written. All its paths are peace. Accordingly, such peace will be lasting. By harmoniously maintaining these divisions, we will become worthy of the advent of the era when there will be no war, no envy or competition. With the coming of Mashiach, who will be a descendant of David, and Shlomo. And the concerning of Shlomo, as is written, he will be a man of sincerity. I will endow Yisrael with peace and tranquility in his days. The implication is that although there will still be non-Jews in the future era, because of the Mashiach's Torah leadership, an atmosphere of peace and unity will prevail all existences. Even then, the Jews will be distinct from the nations of the world, as it is written. Foreigners will arise and pasture your flocks, and as the Rambam writes, Mashiach will then perfect the entire world, motivating all the nations to serve Hashem together, as it is written. For then I will transform the peoples, granting them pure speech, so that they will call upon the name of Hashem and serve him with one accord.